So let's just begin. And I think a lot of us know each other. I just want to make sure people that Shu. How do I say that? I had it before and I lost it.
It's shoe like a shoe.
Shu, that's what I thought. Yeah, okay. I should have trusted my instincts on that. But Shu, I'm not sure everybody knows you because we might have been on different sessions before. So you want to tell us who you are?
Sure. I'm Shu. I live in Dover, PA. And currently I do some work with the Capital Area Behavioral Health Collaborative, but I also do independent work, some consulting, and I've been part of a lot of initiatives in PA around family engagement, inclusion, mental health, / trauma, suicide prevention. So I kind of have my hands in a lot of things.
That's great. Wonderful. And is there anybody on the line well, let's just all introduce ourselves to Shu, because I'm not sure that we have been on the same calls together. Ellen, you want to start?
Hi, Shu. I'm Ellen Kagan. I have been with the System of Care movement since the inception, the very beginning, and I served with the Georgetown University Technical Assistance Center since its inception. And my area of focus has become leadership and systems change, as well as now bringing the coach approach to adaptive leadership.
Perfect.
So you may have heard about that in Pennsylvania and that training. So that has emanated out of some of the work that I have done for many years in systems.
Yeah, and I'm learning more about how the coach approach, Shannon has been talking about it. This morning I heard Ann talking about it. So we know a lot of people that are being trained in coach approach. Sounds wonderful. And let's see how we can make some of this align, because this idea that we're either on one thing or another thing, you see so many people that think that, oh, we don't do that, we do this, right? On one of those early examples, I shared how in Pennsylvania, when we first started the behavioral health community of practice, which is still going since 2004.
We just had a meeting, Joanne.
But what's that?
We just had a meeting. Literally finished right before this. Yeah.
Oh, did you? Okay, great. I was on some emails between Tim and some other people. So it's always so good to see that everything is still going. But when we first started that community, and Sherry was part of this, the Secretary of Ed at that time, he could not see. It was like, what do we need this for when we have resiliency? He couldn't see that PBIS and resiliency had any kind of overlap. And you see that in far too many places. So I'm delighted that Ellen's here and everybody that's going through Coach Approach is seeing what's useful about this, and let's make that connection. That's just great.
Joanne, I actually just chatted with Jamal and said, could you connect me with Joanne, because she and I really need to link our work together and how it can build on each other. So I'm 100% with you.
Absolutely, Ellen. Oh, good. I was having the same thoughts, and I'm so glad you started the conversation. I'll just join it now. It's wonderful. Thank you. Good. So, Ann, do you want to tell everybody who you are? Just we'll do that real quick,
Sure.
And we'll get going.
Ann Katonalyn, I'm kind of doing a variety of things. Shu, you and I have a lot in common. I'm doing a variety of things too. Coach Approach and getting certified as a coach, do mostly around school-based mental health and positive behavior intervention supports, and really helping schools and communities kind of integrate and work smarter and not harder. But I definitely want to be on that conversation too, because I've been doing both of them. So I've been kind of starting to. Well, and I know Shannon as well, but yes, I can
Absolutely.
give you guys some info.
Great. Yeah, wonderful. So Kate, how about you? You want to just tell us, about how you got here and what you're planning on doing?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Kate Roberts. I am a graduate student in the doctoral program at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm looking at special education policy and the way that it gets implemented. And so I was very lucky to get an opportunity this summer to intern with Joanne at NASTY. So I'm serving as Joanne's intern this summer.
Yeah, and she's doing a great job. And the one thing some of you that are in special ed or have been around DC, you know that Alexa Posney was the assistant secretary. And Alexa funds a scholarship at the University of Wisconsin for a doctoral student to do policy work in DC, and Kate got that scholarship. So that's how we got Kate. So we're delighted, and she's been involved in a lot of things, everything from dispute resolution to behavioral health, the National Coordinating Committee on School Health and Safety, teacher preparation, and leading by convening. So she's getting an assortment of things in her time with us today. Okay, how about Jamal?
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Jamal Ford, and I am the Youth Resources Coordinator for the Pennsylvania Care Partnership. And I do a host of other things for the partnership. I work very closely with Mark to kind of keep things rolling the way that they need to be rolling. He's a very busy man, so anything that kind of falls off of his plate, I kind of pick it up so that we can keep things moving in the right direction. So
that's exactly right. And he saves me on all this technology stuff, as you can see. That's great. Okay, so everybody's got a little bit of background here on what we're doing. And for the first sessions when we were together, the very first one, we did 5 hours on leading by convening basics. And last time we focused on some of the tools that are around beginning collaborations. How do you start collaborations well? How do you do the foundations of trust? And today we're going to focus on keeping that collaboration going. And one of the things that Jamal and I were just talking about before we got on the phone was this idea that almost every grant program that comes out has got a requirement as it moves toward the end, to talk about how it's going to sustain. And one of the things that I really like to direct people to is that it's really a little too late when you're thinking about the end of a project to think about sustainability. Sustainability has got to come from the beginning of a project, from the beginning of a relationship. And in that way, it makes it more likely that something is going to sustain from the work that we've done. If we continue to think about sustainability as something that we focus on at the end of a project, it perpetuates that idea that work is something that you're doing to people, and you got to give them an extra dose at the end to make sure that they're able to continue it without the supports that you've had in place through partnership funds or whatever. If you build it with the idea of you're going for sustainability from the beginning of the relationship, then you're communicating this idea that what we're doing here has value for me and it has value for you. And together we're going to define what that value is for the work that we care about. And in that way, you're building this over time, and it's much more likely that they're going to carry on with the work that you've invested in over the time of the grant. So, leading by convening has that kind of approach, sustainability from the beginning. And the way that I like to talk about this is that when you're using leading by convening, you're focusing on the task and you're focusing on the relationship. As a convener, you're focusing on both things. And that's a lot to juggle, right? It's a lot to juggle when you're keeping the task in mind with all the requirements that you have to meet, all the due dates that you have to meet. It's easy to focus on yourself and not focus on the relationship with the collaborators. And so what these tools and practices that I'm going to share with you today are to make it more likely that the things you do will build that relationship while you are working on that task with your collaborators. So that's the way I'd like to try to frame what we're going to do today. And I'm asking your advice on this work that we're going to do. It's important to me to know that this work, these ideas come across. So as we go through this, if you can stop me at any time and say, I don't quite get how that goes together, that I think will help everybody that's on the line, but it'll also help me to know how to clarify some of this stuff, because, I'm interested in use of this material, right? It's not a check off that I delivered this to you. I'm interested in use of this material. So feel free anytime to stop and just ask me, any kind of clarifying questions. Don't worry about that at all. It's a small group of us. We should take advantage of that. Okay. So that's the frame that we're going to have today: the task, the relationship, and how the tools and practices, support that. So I'm going to try to share these tools today, and it's a lot, but there's a small group. I think we'll be able to get through this. So the first tool I'm going to share is grounding assumptions. And this one is not, this is your Leading by Convening book that you're going to get in the mail from Jamal. Grounding assumptions is not in your book because we developed it. Let's say the beginning piece of grounding assumptions is in your book. What assumptions are, how to generate assumptions on content, how to generate assumptions on behavior, how to generate assumptions on interaction. That is in your book. This tool that's based on that is not in your book because we developed it after the book came out. So I'm going to share with you the tool. The first part is in your book. The second part is not, and I'll make sure that you get all the stuff. I have a link up on the National Center for Systemic Improvement that's got a whole suite of things around grounding assumptions, and I'll give you that link, okay? The second one is defining our core, and I'm giving you examples of where each of these are used. The defining our core example is the Pennsylvania Community of Practice, the Project Directors Community of Practice. So, I think that you'll recognize some of what we're trying to do in Pennsylvania, and I'm certainly anxious to see how some of your experience fits in with the things that came out as they use this tool. The next two are an example of a strategy called co-creation. And, many of you, it's pretty straightforward what co-creation is. You're doing something together. And that doesn't sound like it should be a new idea, but, for years we have said we're going to do something with the stakeholders, and really, a small group of people with expert knowledge develop it and send it out to the stakeholders for a little bit of feedback. Tweak this, tweak that. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about having the content come up with both experts and practitioners and in the intended beneficiaries in the room and developing something together. And it's a little bit messier than having people that know all the content and know how to put something together and then just send it out for approval. It's a little bit messier than that, but along the way, you're focusing on the task and the relationship. You're building both sides while you're co-creating something. So we're going to do two examples of co-creation. First, infographics, which, infographics, when we first started this, nobody knew about infographics. Now everybody knows about infographics, but we're going to spend a little time talking about how you can do co-creation of infographics as a way to bring people into this work. Then we're going to talk about how you can put the co-created infographics together with a co-created dialogue and really help people to be able to use it in their own networks. And then the last tool we're going to do is one that's, kind of pretty highly motivating, at least I found it to be, called a quick chronology of change. It's a way to find out what all of your stakeholders believe is beneficial in a really simple way. And it's kind of fun. So those are the tools that we're going to go over today. It's certainly not all the tools that are in the Leading by Convening book, but these are ones I thought anybody could kind of pick up and use to keep a collaboration going. So let's kind of get into it, okay?
Yeah, it was, I had taken control. I was responding to a message.
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay.
Joanne, just really quick. Shu was actually here with us on Monday.
Was she? Oh, Shu.
Yes. I thought I saw her name on Monday. I wasn't sure, but she was here on Monday with us.
All right, good. And so you came back again.
She might be leaving though.
Oh, okay. You staying with us or you leaving?
I'll stay. I'll stay. It's all good. It was, I don't know why I signed up for both sessions. I thought it was different ones. So it's all
okay.
good.
Yes. You did sign up for both sessions. Yeah.
It's all good.
Okay, all right. We understand if you're leaving because you got a lot of stuff to do too, I'm sure. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is this little poll. And the reason, I think we kind of know this about this group, but the point of this is that in leading by convening, you're always finding out about the audience, and you're always bringing it to their attention that, back to poll 1, Jamal.
I don't know why it's that. Okay.
There it is, yeah, okay. So, and the point of this is, even in a group like this where we kind of know what perspective it is, it's the idea of always putting something like this in. So you're bringing attention to the group that here's the kind of people we have in the room and the kind of experiences that are in the room, and then always drawing their attention to, you know, there are perspectives that are not represented by this discussion. So it's not as though this is the last word on this. We should be finding out what people think that aren't in this room, right? So let's find out what this one is. So look at that. Community perspective. Perfect. Look at this, where we've got, you know, the statewide, the regional, the county, the community, and we don't have youth perspective here. So, you know, I think that's one of the things we'll have to keep in mind, that to what extent could youth participate in some of the tools we're talking about today? To what extent would youth have to be prepared to participate meaningfully in the tools that we're talking about today? But look, we've got a really good representation of perspectives that people are bringing to this. So we're going to go on to poll 2. So let's take a look at poll 2. Jamal, it's not letting me here.
There you
All right, now there I go. Now we're on poll 2. So this one, because we're talking about collaborations and we're talking about collaboration over time, this poll is asking you, have you been in a collaboration where you felt, and then there's a whole list of ways that people typically describe the way that they've been engaged in a collaboration. So check all that apply, okay? Let's see what you have. So let's put that poll up, Jamal, and let's see what people say.
coming. There we go.
And if you need to move it down, you can just, on this gray slider on the side will move it down if you can't see everything, okay?
There we go.
There it goes. All right, so let's take a look at this. So if you take a look at this, and this was kind of the, you know, the point of this, this activity was to see the extent to which, you know, we have a number of people that are in a different kind of roles. And when you look at this, they, you know, they've got a lot of, they've had a lot of experiences. What's interesting to me is there's one that says other. And I'd like to really hear who, I mean, if you're willing to, there was something on there that somebody thought was an other. So would anybody be willing to share? Ellen, was that you? Go ahead, share.
So I have also been parts of collaboration where I have felt controlled, as if the facilitator had an answer that they were really literally controlling us to get to.
Absolutely. That's a good one. I'm going to add that one to this. Okay. This is good. I took some of the common things I hear, but controlled, that's really a good one. That's a collaboration killer, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Why did you even bring me to the table other than to say I was there? And, you know, my name is now on that list and we're getting to this solution that you've designed already. not really co-created. You
know, you bring up a good point, Ellen. And this is to me, this hit me when I first went to DC. It hit me so strongly. And it was one of the first things I noticed about being in national collaborations, you know, not having had that experience before, was that somehow your name on a participant list is what they were looking for, to show how many people, what variety of stakeholders. It was like putting the participant list together was the same as having support. And that's really wrong, you know? So I'm glad you brought that up. That's great. So if you take a look at these responses, what do you think we could say about people's experiences in collaboration?
Mixed.
What do you think?
It's been mixed because some of been very positive. If I remember, Jamal, I don't have the thing in front of me, but I was really happy to see people felt valued, and there were two of the things at the top that were 100%. So everyone's had the experience of being what a strong collaboration can be. And Shu, I totally agree with you. The controlling is like being a token member, right?
Absolutely.
Very much related.
Absolutely.
I checked all of them because other than I didn't do other, but yeah, I've had that full spectrum of experiences, and so it just is. There's such different perspectives. It's really interesting. So to look at this.
Yeah,
and I can think about those meetings where I felt that way. You know, like who were the collaborations? Like I could tell you exactly what were the characteristics of the situation. So
yeah, and just the things that we talked about this morning about the fact that not all the perspectives are in the room. One of the other experiences that I think I've had in DC is when you try to share the fact that there are other perspectives, and if they were in the room, the conversation would be different. It's sort of like, Pollyanna, like we can't have everybody in the room, so that's one that really stuck out for me. Chu, you have your hand up. What did you want to share with us?
Yeah, just to add to what was already said about the whole, people wanting a certain category of members at the table. It looks good on papers.
Absolutely.
And especially coming from a family perspective, I got involved in a lot of these family initiatives in PA because I wanted to bring the family's perspective to the table, not just to be counted as being present. And it really bothers me when it's like, yeah, we have all these families represented, and we'll leave with like, nobody heard anything we had to say,
Exactly.
On paper to the funders, it looks like families were included, and we're not.
Absolutely. So you felt that too. This idea that your name on a participant list translates to look at being included is so wrong, And if there's one thing we can do with the coach approach and the leading by convening is to clarify that, because how many people use that for their data, right? That we had all these perspectives and it looks like a nice piece of data, but the people that are under that data do not represent what they're trying to convey. It's not as though those people agree or are even on the same page. And yet, and we continue to do that. So this idea, it's not a bad idea to use the diversity of your perspectives as part of your data, but to say that represents any kind of agreement or any kind of inclusion is really a misnomer, So that's a great one for us to take away from this. This is great. Okay, so one of the things that I was really wanted to focus on here was that it just keeps going back to.
I was about to say, I'm not sure why it keeps going to.
Yeah, it keeps going to that, Jamal. I don't know. So I think we better just expect that it's going to do that after polls, okay? So maybe you better move it the next time after the poll, all right? Or we'll be in that situation every time, I think. We'll try it out. So the point that I really wanted to bring up with that poll was that, regardless of our position, our role, or our level of influence in our own system, we know what it feels like to be invited, included, and valued. And we also know what it feels like not to be. I mean, we know those indicators of like, they really do want me here. They're listening to me. They see that I have something to offer. And we definitely know when it's not that way, right? And so as going into the stuff that we're going to do today, I'm just asking you to think about your own experiences in collaboration and how some of these tools answer what we're trying to get to. This idea of making it real, making it authentic to the people that we invite into a collaboration. So we had an interesting one, and I don't know if anybody was on I don't know which session it came up in, and I don't know who was on those sessions, but in one of the sessions last week when we were doing the images of collaboration, which is always good for people tell you a lot about their experience in collaboration through those pictures. But somebody brought this one up, and it's absolutely the first time I heard it, that they did not see that collaboration is coming together. They saw it as falling apart.
Yeah, I was on that session. It was It was the second one.
Yeah,
did.
it was, and it was the first time I had ever heard anybody say that, but it really goes to what we're talking about today, that you could have something that is fundamentally solid. It could start out that way, could even grow that way. But then you got those things like the money changes or somebody in leadership changes, and you start to see it falling apart. And that's what the things that we're trying to do today are to build the relationship that will hold it together beyond those changes in funding, in staffing, things like that. That's really what we're about today. So one of the things that, ways that I like to convey this, and you'll tell me if it makes sense to you or not, is that if you are seeing yourself as a convener in a collaboration, that is more than putting the meeting together. So when you see yourself as a convener in a collaboration, it means that you're holding both the task and the relationship, and you're using practices that are going to build on that. So the way I describe it is, you can let it happen by putting people together and hoping that they find each other and that they like it and they'll keep coming back. You can let it happen. You can help it happen by bringing in, some of the activities to strengthen that relationship, by putting a structure together so that they have routine kinds of interactions with each other. It's predictable. They can see it going somewhere, right? Somebody that did the picture of that puzzle, they called it making the corners, creating the corners before you start filling in the middle. That's the structure. That's the help it happen kind of work. But the biggest piece of that is this make it sustainable. It's the step that actually makes it a collaboration, because the people may change, the funding may change, the issue may change, the initiative may change, but you've built something where people are coming together around an issue, regardless of what it's called, regardless of who's funding it, regardless of whose priority it is. They're coming together around something that is sustainable. And so, I kind of portray it this way in terms of these stages. And if we think about it in terms of leading by convening, what we're asking people to do is to think about these habits of interaction that are going to do that. We're asking them to think about the elements of interaction, the adaptive and the technical kind of side of that work. And then these operational things, the decisions they make about what they're going to do. And lastly, we're asking them to think about the depth of collaboration that they are trying to engage at. Are they satisfied with this shallow collaboration, or are they going for deep work? Because sustainability is deep work. It's not just funding people over time, it's deep work over time. So one of the things that I wanted to do, and I wanted to see how you feel about this, I tried to do a little match between those stages and the stages of engagement that we have, that we talked about in leading by convening. In one of our first sessions, you described what you would see if it was an informing kind of strategy, and some of what's there is based on what the stakeholders that did leading by convening said, and some of what you said, that here's what this is. This is what you'd expect to see as this collaboration deepens, and that in my mind, this is how that this kind of maps onto these stages of helping a collaboration. So in the beginning, these, the shallow work is just telling people or getting people to tell you something back. There's really no two-way. Then when we start to go into it, we start to do more work together over time, and gradually that becomes the way we work. So from your point of view, does this work? Does this fit with, does one actually kind of lay on top of the other and say, if all you want to do is just let people find each other, then this idea of informing and networking, if that's what you're aiming for, it's probably okay. Don't expect much, but it's probably okay if that's all you're aiming for. But if you're aiming for these deeper levels of work, and you're aiming for sustainability, you got to change it a little bit, and you have to really adjust what you're doing in all ways. So what do you think? Does this work for you? Does it say it? Does it explain what we're trying to convey?
Yeah, I think so. Because, you know, it makes it more concrete, I think.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because it's the sharing or disseminating one way. You can have one thought about it, but I think the connecting that and the letting it happen it just makes it more real.
It does,
like I
yeah.
can see it, you know, more so.
That's a good way to say it. It is, because sometimes you can give this to people, but you've got to make it in a way that makes sense to them. So yeah, thank you, Ann. That's good, because you can say sharing and disseminating is a shallow level. Then you translate it into, if all you want to do is let this happen on its own, okay, that's what you're doing, you know?
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Oh, so I'm going really deep here, Joanne.
That's good. I'm glad. Go ahead.
And I'm loving this, because in teaching change all these years, I just had this super wonderful aha. So thank you. When people talk about sustainability from a grant context, they're mostly talking about policy and financing.
Absolutely.
And what you're saying here is that the hearts and minds of the people have to change in order for that policy to be anything more than a one-way communication.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Ellen. Yeah.
So I'm loving the framing of sustainability in this convening context. That's number one. And the second thing I'm thinking about is, how often have people used the word sustainability by saying, I shared what we wanted to do, I disseminated what our vision was. I remember I was in Arkansas one time. I was with a system of care director who told me she had spent the past year presenting her PowerPoint 123 times on what a system of care was. And she said, but I don't see the people changing. And I said to her, I said, you know, it's like Einstein, you know, if you do it 124 times, do you think it's anything different is going to happen? And so fundamentally, you're asking us to do a mindset shift, I think, what you're saying here.
Absolutely.
And that this commitment to the engagement is what is truly going to be the transformative component.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say how much I appreciate it.
Well said. All right. Boy, that is really well said. I'm going to write that down. But, you know, the idea that our evaluator, the whole time we were going through the partnership, he kept saying to me, you know, you have to say, you know, people like all this, you know, stuff that we're doing, bringing people together. But the point of it is, what's it for, you know? And so basically we came out with the end with this statement that you know, that engagement seems like a little squishy strategy, but it's actually more powerful than the things that have got tons of protocols and tons of fidelity checks with it. It's actually much more powerful than any of those, because you can do all of that, you know, in a formulaic way. But if you don't actually believe it, as soon as somebody, I mean, why do we think that as soon as you stop doing fidelity checks, things change? Because if people were really wedded to it, you know, they continue that in some way. I mean, you know, this idea that that we can separate the belief that the belief in what you're doing from learning a practice is just not true. It's not how people are built. And so we really kept trying to go for showing people that if you're a leader, you know, you have to ask yourself, I can have all this stuff in place. I can have the most beautiful manuals in the world. I can have the best funded training practices. But if these people decide they are not going with me, what was all that for, you know? And so this idea that a leader has got to ask themselves, what are you going to do if the stakeholders don't go with you? And then the stakeholders have to ask themselves, what are you going to do if you can't get the formal system to understand what value you're offering to them? And so we're trying to go for the idea that sustainability is that kind of that people are wedded together in actually making a difference, and it's got to be based on the idea that people believe they're making a change based on the fact that they believe it's going to make something better, not because they were funded for training, not because they enjoyed the group that they were training with, not because it gave them some kind of role in their own system, a little bit of highlight, although all those things are true. But if they don't actually believe what's underneath it, it's not going to change anything. So that's really what we were trying to convey in this. And I appreciate your insights here in validating that. And if you have any ideas about how I should be communicating that to the audiences that you work with, how you would say it to the audiences that you work with, I would love to hear that, okay? Because it is not an easy thing to communicate. As Ann was saying, you got to keep making it more concrete, more concrete, more concrete. All right.
Joanne, just quick, are you going to get into the survey in the chronology of change, the self-assessment survey at all?
You mean in the making a difference with the rubrics?
No, the self-assessment of teams on how they're engaged, their levels of engagement.
I wasn't going to show that one today, but I think that's a good one to bring up. Maybe you could talk about it when we get there, okay?
Yeah, I'm just thinking I need to use it with a couple teams right now, so.
Yeah, very good. So I wasn't going to, bring that one up, Ann, because that's an extension of what we're going to show today. So I wanted to, as we're talking about this sustainability, all right? And we divided this session into two pieces, beginning and continuing. And I think this to me has some meaning. So if I were saying to you, what do you think this slide has got to do with the topic that we're talking about? Being in a collaboration and doing things together over time. What do you think?
I see the things on the top as kind of those checklist things. It is the technical work, but the adaptive work is so much, the foundation of it. And you talked about, it's kind of like the messy, that people aren't always, the messy middle or whatever, the messy part that people aren't comfortable with sometimes, but it's critical for holding up the tasks. But what we see and what we typically see are those, and Ellen talked about funding and policies and those are those things, but.
Absolutely.
And it just is still mind blowing to me how many years I've been doing this, that it's still like, and even, there's still so many state and there's so many state organizations and large groups that still operate out of that top of the iceberg. So it's just really,
And unless we ask our evaluations to sample something else, it's going to continue that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Ellen, go ahead.
So in addition to sort of the system organizational components that you can see, we can also think about this from a cultural perspective, that above the line, we make certain assumptions about people by the way they dress and by the way their skin color is, by their gender, or at least the gender we can assume, all above the watermark. And then we start making judgments, and everything that's judgy is below the water, because oftentimes the viewer don't express that. And then from the person that we're seeing, they're so full of so much more complexity than we ever give credence to. And until we inquire into who am I really, you're going to stick with all your assumptions about me, and I never get to share with you who my true self is.
Absolutely. Yep. So Shu, from a family perspective, what do you think that might, might mean for families, or how would families interpret that image?
There's so many things, I guess, combined with what was already said, that what our children, for example, are presenting at the surface is all that people are seeing. We're not seeing maybe the stress that the family is feeling underneath. And sometimes in our system now, maybe in our systems of care, plural, not just this, agency per se, but I guess across all those services that families can benefit from, often we focus on the individual who qualifies for the service, and we don't support the entire tribe that's supporting this individual when there's no services around.
Absolutely. Oh, that's great. So I know that this image is used a lot, and sometimes I hesitate to put it in. I thought people were going to go, oh my God, here we go with the iceberg again. But the idea, look at the things that you saw in that. Anne saw, the idea of the things that are on the surface and the issues that really go together. Ellen saw something different, and Shu saw it very much from the family perspective, all of which are important. And as many times as we've seen this and we say that to each other, and this iceberg image comes up, quite often in our trainings, as much as we say these things to each other, we're still looking for and oftentimes we report the things that are above the surface, right? And if we're really looking for this sustainability, we have got to be, it's not easy, it's messy, and it is a risk, but we've got to go for the things that are under the surface too, if things are actually ever going to change. And so I was thinking about this also in the terms of these two sessions that we had. The first session was all about good beginnings, and the good beginnings are the stuff that's on the top. You're leaving the meetings feeling pretty good, and then you hit something and you find out what's under the surface. And that's where the real test of these collaborations comes in. And when we're in the IDA partnership, you can imagine 50 national organizations, as different as, the state directors of special ed, council of chief state school officers, and then you have NEA, AFT, pretty different perspective on some of the ways that things ought to go. Then you have the family centers. All the family centers that have been funded by OSEP in the States. So you're talking about something where somebody thinks they did a really good thing, and all the other people in the room are like, yeah, well, you didn't think about this, and you didn't think about this, and you didn't think about this, and you didn't think about this. So, it took us, and that's actually why we did Leading by Convening, because that's the situation we're in. And then we did these 5 modules for West Ed, and you'll hear one of the guys talk, and he's the special ed chair for California Teachers Association, which is the largest of all the NEA chapters, pretty influential in California. And so, he's talking about when we first started a partnership, he gets a little dramatic, that we were basically, he kind of portrays it as we were almost rolling on the floors fighting. I wouldn't say it was exactly that, but the point was there was a lot of dissension, and it really could have broken us, but we made the commitment to stay together. And that's why, even when I was afraid that putting this together as a framework would be like a little cookbook, I just really resisted it. And the partner said to me, no, we have been through too much. We're going to do this. We're putting this out because people need to know what it takes to actually get through some of this stuff, I think about the very first summit we ever had. And the 100 Black Men of America are one of the partners that we had. We did a lot of work with the 100 on helping businessmen in communities understand about disproportionality and how kids were getting put into special ed, in first grade and never learning what other kids learn. What were we expecting when they're 15 and 16? We're expecting a different outcome. And over time, you would be able to hear businessmen who could explain how you get identified for special ed is just about as good as a school psychologist could. And when we had the first summit, people were not prepared for that. They were used to people coming into these collaborations and didn't have that kind of information. And having people talk about systemic racism, it was uncomfortable, but we stayed together. Mm-hmm. And people worked through it. And, now all some of the guys that represented the 100 from various chapters around the country are on the committees that some of these organizations are, that they're working on, and they're turning. You'll see some of the work in the Leading by Convening video that one of the guys has featured in there. So I'm sharing that example to say, there are some of these topics that really serve to tell you whether you've got something going or not. And some of these issues really demand that you get below the surface, and it is not easy and it's not comfortable. But if you go into it with this spirit of collaboration and you use some of the kind of tools that I hope to share today, you know, we can make progress on some of these issues. So let's just keep going. So the first thing I'm going to do is a tool called grounding assumptions, and it's really about conversations that reveal, and it's about starting to understand what's underneath the surface, right? You're not even really getting in there yet. You're just starting to understand that, hey, somebody thinks about this differently than I do. So this tool called grounding assumptions, it tests our assumptions about, test your assumptions with others. So you're saying something, and in a group that's listening to you and has agreed to listen to you before they make judgments about everybody in the group, that you're learning before you respond to them the full picture of what's going on in that room. Okay, so one of the things that we do with this idea of leading by convening and this the tool I'm going to show you today is that, you know, it is there's no cross-talk, so that everybody talks before you can ask anybody else a question, before you can respond to anybody else. You have to hear the whole group so that you're responding and you know where the red lights are for all the people in that group, and you can decide to ask something in a different way so that the conversation goes in a more productive way than a less productive way where you're just reacting to what one person says. So, okay, so here's grounding assumptions. And one of the things that I like to point out to state teams is that if you don't know the assumptions that your team is bringing to your plan, your theory of action, your logic model, and your evaluation could be going in a very different direction than what lies just below what you're doing. And so, you know, I usually encourage state teams to do a grounding assumption so they understand the range of beliefs for the people that are in that possible collaboration. So here's one of the things that we do, and I'm going to give you the procedure and see if you think that this would that this meets your needs. So it's kind of simple, multi-step, but it's really straightforward. So we try to get people in groups of about 5 to 8, and they react to assumptions about some topic. Okay, so the example I'm going to show you today is Texas. And right after the flood, the hurricane and the flood, there was huge impacts in that Texas system. And families were moved, their houses destroyed, that all of a sudden they're in a whole different place. Their living arrangements are different. They've lost jobs, quite a lot like we've got here with this COVID situation. And so what we were trying to point out was that this was the time for the school-based behavioral health and the community mental health to start coming together. So this was the grounding assumptions. How do you bring the community-based mental health and school-based mental health together? What's the urgency of doing that? So it was a PBIS and community mental health that we were trying to focus on in Texas. And so here's what we did. Tables of 5 to 8 people from diverse backgrounds. That's a big one, that not everybody from the same table is of the same background, so that you don't get a group think. But that they generate 5 assumptions about bringing that group together, and they state it in the positive. Okay, so if I was going to say that I think that one of the issues is that, you know, schools and school-based behavioral health and community mental health, they have different training traditions, right? They really don't have the same training traditions, so that's a barrier. If I wanted to say that in a positive way, I'd act like that's not a barrier. The assumption is, even though they have different training traditions, they can do this, right? So you're forced to say to the positive, okay? So the next thing is, of the 5 assumptions they create, and most often they really generate them, they generate a lot more than 5, they have to pick 3. At the table, they have to agree on their top 3. And then the facilitator on I think it has to be a screen, because you want the whole group to see it. You start asking every table, give me your top assumption, and you go around the room. And usually they're different. They hit different things. right? Then you start the second time around. What's your number 2? By the time you get to number 2, about halfway through, people are saying, well, we said that, we said it, it's up there, we just said it a little differently. So you start to know that if you've got this many different people and they raised at least 5, probably more assumptions, and they rated the top 3, and now you're starting to get repeat, you're getting to the top assumptions here, right? So, and then you go one more time. And by the time you're on number 3, most of the people are saying, what we said is already up there. So that's how your check is, that you're getting the real things that are dividing people or bringing people together, okay? So now you have a list, you probably have 10 or 12, right? In your assumptions, and it's on a master list on the screen. So here's the master list from this conversation in Texas, right after the flood. And we did this, Texas was trying to show in a demonstrable way that they were trying to be less controlling and that they were more open to interaction. So we did this conversation at the Federation meeting when it was in the Federation conference when it was in Texas. So we went to the families to have this conversation. So these are the top, these, excuse me. Excuse me again. These are the top assumptions that came out. These were the top 10. Now there's pages of assumptions. If I sent you the list of things that came out of those tables, but these are the top 10, right? So this is what's on the screen, and then we're going to ask them to do 2 things. At their table, they're going to rate the top 3, and they're going to rate the top 3 that is either, you're going to rate it in 2 ways. And in this group, I said agreement and lack of agreement. Okay, agree, disagree, right? So that's what I said, but you don't have to do that. You could say understood, least understood. You know, you could say the thing that this group is most able to influence or least able to influence. You could change it, whatever is useful to you. But the idea is you've now really gotten all these assumptions from these diverse groups. You've got this list of the things that they are identifying as the things that really can either advance or constrain. And now you're asking them and this is the cue that I usually give them. I say, so as you're answering this, here's what I'd say. If you said that in a room and you'd see a lot of heads nodding, then that's agreement. If you'd say this in a room and you'd see a lot of eyes rolling, then that's disagreement, right? So you're thinking about yourself saying this in your constituency, and that's the way that I ask them to react. So that you're not saying, I feel this way. You're asking them to represent their constituency. And you really get a lot of comments when you ask them to do that. And that's the picture I give them when they're going to respond. So they, at their table, they have to talk about this. They rate it individually. And then they, as the table, they give out the top 3 on each side, and you capture it on a flip chart. So here's the flip chart. I don't know, Jamal, it's not moving. Oh. That's way off. I don't know where that came from, but let's see if we can get this. Ah, there it is. Okay. So here's, you see, on the flip chart, you're putting the ones that are most agreement in on green, the ones with the least agreement in on red, and this is what you see. So after all of that, it comes down to this, and you're asking them, what do you see here? What does this tell you? And so if, even without knowing what those X's represent, what would you say from just seeing that visual of those red and green X's? What would you say about that?
Number 2 and 10 have the most agreement. I mean, you know, they're only agreement and not disagreement.
Absolutely. So your low-hanging fruit is 2 and 10, right? So if you do something around 2 and 10 as a first effort, you're probably going to get a lot of support, right? So maybe that's one of the first things you can do. It's what somebody on the last call called the low-hanging fruit. You know, we hear that term a lot. 2 and 10 are your low-hanging fruit. So what else would you say about this? Which one do you think really takes some communication as to what people see in it? Well, maybe there's more than one there.
Well, I think in any of the places where you're seeing lack of alignment needs more work.
Mhm.
I often try to think about things like this, Joanne, from a sort of a managing change perspective. I love what you just said about 2 and 10. And it depends on how disrupting the group feels with each other. Do they need a short-term win? Do they need low-hanging fruit to like
Absolutely.
bring the energy up? And is the group really ready to tackle something like 6, where there seems to be one person who feels super strongly about this? And where does something, and the other thing I'm not sure about that I'd love your perspective is that in order to do 2 and 10, does anything else need to be, aligned for those to be successful? So, I want to really go deep into the lack of alignment on the others.
Mhm. Absolutely. Those are the most interesting. The most interesting are the ones where it is both most and least. And you know that after all of this surfacing of all the possible issues that could be, these things came to the top, and you still have this kind of dissension. So it shows you got to know what people are seeing in this. What I see in this issue is not what somebody else sees in this issue. And so this idea of, most often they start to say, we have to learn what everybody else thinks about this, right? I mean, so 2 and 10 might be something we can do while we spend more time learning about each other. Let's see what we can do on 2 and 10. But if we're going to actually change anything that's important to us, we got a lot more of learning to do about what each other knows about this issue. So this is, and so here's the simple debrief. When I share with the whole material, all the materials with you, you'll see some of the debrief actually leads to other tools. And, depending on how much time you have or what your sequence of events are, it leads you to some of the other tools that you can use. But this one is just if you're doing a short, like for this meeting, those people were all together for one day there. After the conference was over, they were going to go their own way. So we had to focus on something they could do and something they could do with Texas, where the Texas Ed Agency could offer its resources and its capacity to fulfill what they were going to do. So 2 and 10, there was some capacity to act on 2 and 10, and for them to see that they were influencing what the state agency was going to do. And we even had they have education service centers there, which some cases are as big as states, and the agency that trains PBIS was there. And the person that had the AWARE grant that was dealing with all the trauma after the flood, they were there. So they could commit right there to doing something based on that conversation. And but it was clear that there was so much more that they really needed to do in terms of helping people to think about how this affected. I mean, the conversation there was about, how do you go into a trauma-filled environment like this with the same old discipline system in schools? Because you're going to know, these were the things. And now they couldn't promise that they could change that, but they could talk about that, right? So those were the kind of things that came out on the areas that had some green, some red. Those kind of things came up, like, yeah, we could talk about the idea that we understand that trauma is involved in behavior, but asking the school district to change its discipline code is something that we're probably not going to be able to do from this meeting, right? So those are the kind of things that came up.
Wait, Joanne, can I ask a question about this? Because I think this is also really interesting. This activity was only around the assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
Did you do the same activity when they got, or would you recommend that they do the same activity as they start defining what the actions would be that would be around the assumption? So number 2, where there's agreement. So it looks like it could be just you're in a technical moment, there's alignment, we can move forward, but then you get into what are we going to do about it? The how, it could split again, and you've kind of got to test those assumptions again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so that's kind of the point here, Ellen, that we're talking about, I gave you this brief form. This is just what we did at that day, raise some things, and then people committed to it. We put Post-it notes around the room. They talked about what it would be. Here's what the, and this is what, who needs to do it, who's going to lead it. One of the things we did was that the Education Service Center and the Aware Grant, who had the money to do this, right? The people came up there and then they said, we're expecting that the Aware Grant's going to do this, that the Education Service Center is going to do this. And then that's what the point of co-leading, that they were, for some of the first times, the Parent Center, which has been federally funded there for years and years, was there at the table with them and not seen as somebody that was going to come in and criticize them, but was entering as a partner, So that was a really good, and we did it at the Federation Conference, for this very reason, so that they would have a relationship with the Texas Federation to go forward and continue to involve families, in this work if they were in this session together. So yeah, absolutely. You're very, very right on that. Absolutely. So I'm going to show you when we go through some of these other things, how we followed up on this. Okay. So that's grounding assumptions. And that's when you're face to face. That's how we did it. Now I've been looking for a way to do grounding assumptions online. And this isn't exactly the same thing, but it's as close as I can find right now. So there's a tool called Padlet. And in Padlet, you get like a bulletin board. And you just click on it and it gives you a Post-it note and you can write something. Okay, but Padlet now has developed a lot of other things. And this is one of them, where you can put that Post-it note, and as instead of typing the assumptions on the master, I type it on a Padlet, and right there, it gives you an up and down. So you can do the up and down right there on that master. So it's not perfect, but it's a way that you can take the idea of grounding assumptions and you'll have to do something afterwards with it, but it allows the essence of this idea to come forward in a really simple online way, So you can use all of the stuff leading up to it, and then this is one of the newest things on Padlet. Up to this point, Padlet was kind of you click on it, you have a sticky, you put it up. Maybe I put a couple columns at the top, and you move your sticky over under the column. But they have a lot of new things. And I think this one is really powerful, where you can generate these conversations and do the thumbs up, thumbs down right away and capture it, as data going forward. So I wanted to share this Padlet with you. I'm going to show you one other example of Padlet. And the reason I'm showing you is you can do 10 Padlets for free. And then it's very low cost, like $8 a month. To go forward for something that's got a lot of capacity. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at this. So, I'm just interested in knowing this. To what extent, for this poll, can you envision something like, grounding assumptions or something like grounding assumptions in your work? So what would you say? Unlikely, very unlikely, unlikely, possibly, likely, or very likely? What do you think? Is that it? Yeah. Well, very good. All right. So I'm glad that, we took this. It's always interesting to me if people think it's got value. I think it's got value because we do it, but it's always important for me to know if people think they can use this. So thank you so much for sharing that. We had good response on the last call too. We had like 18 people on the last one. So I'm hoping that even if you don't use this specific tool, that you think about the kind of things that really underlie this. Great. Oh, Jamal, I think I have to hit the screen, right? Because you were sharing the pad. I don't know why it's doing that, Jamal. Okay, so this tool, now we've got this idea, you're doing the grounding assumptions, you're surfacing that, you're knowing you want to bring these people together. This tool is called Defining Our Core. And, the reason that this was developed in this way is that, we saw that you're starting a collaboration and you think that people are with you. It's kind of like that iceberg. We're doing the simple stuff. So it's easy to think people are with you. And then all of a sudden you hit the tough stuff. So what we thought was we had to develop something that was kind of like a mission statement, only we just called it defining our core. And so the answer was the way we decided to do it was to create sentence stems and have people fill out sentence stems. And then we would basically say, which ones do we agree that are the things that describe what we want to create. So here are the sentence stems. We're united in to accomplish this, and we will know we're making progress when, okay? So I'm going to give you the example of the Pennsylvania Community of Practice, the project director's Community of Practice. I want you to just take a look at some of what they wrote, okay? I love the way they described who they are, because some of these descriptions just fit so much. So take a look and read through these while I'm rambling here. I love this first one. We're passionate but siloed leaders who are diverse in representation but have similar roles and goals. That's beautiful, isn't it? I wish I would have written that. That's great. And just look at some of the others. Jamal, actually, you led some of these tables, right? I mean, you led at least one of these tables, right? Yeah,
I don't know. It may have been before this was when we first started the group.
Yeah.
With us. Yep. The grant's still going, so I'm not sure whether Jamal was.
Okay. So Anne, so you could weigh in on some of this idea of really trying to bring people together, that someplace in Pennsylvania, somebody knows something about this, and we're acting like we're the only ones dealing with it, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was the whole idea of finding some kind of structure that people could buy into, that had enough structure but wasn't strangling, like I'm joining something that's going to tell me what to do. How were we going to create that sense across these, at that time we had 7 SAMHSA grants going, right? So how are we going to do that across these grants, who were all taking on some of the similar subjects like they were the only ones doing it, right? Okay, so that's kind of where we were. So think about some of these things here, and just take a look at it. So look at how they describe themselves. Now look at what they're saying they're united in. Look at how even though, they're pretty together in the way they describe themselves, right? They're pretty together in what they're united in, okay? Then take a look at what they, to accomplish this, what they're going to do, all right? And take a look at those 3 things that they said they're going to do. So what do you see there that they're looking for in this group? This is kind of telling you right there. If you're not giving them this in this group, they aren't hanging with you, right? So what are they looking for? What do you see there? Anything interesting? So Kate, we're trying to build this relationship around all those personnel development grants. Look what you think there's anything there that might fit with the group that we're trying to do with OSEP there?
I definitely think under the third point, to accomplish this, we build relationships, share information, learn with and teach one another, and share mistakes, and continuing on, like share resources, build relationships. I think that definitely fits.
Yeah, so they're looking for this kind of interaction. They want to see this interaction. They don't want one person always telling them something. They want to see multiple people in front of them, right? And look at this one, that third one. The one table put in that what they were looking for was building the relationship, and then they underlined it. Relationships are the intervention, which I thought was, whenever we doubt that we're doing too much of the mushy stuff, we got to remember there are people that really understand that relationships are the intervention. But take a look at this last piece. This is where really it really diverges. Now, if you take a look at the last piece and you're saying, they're telling me what they want here. So one person or one table is looking, they're saying that what we want is this interaction. We know who to reach out to. We want to feel like if we reach out, we're getting something. Another table is saying, we're looking to show me that the infrastructure is there. This isn't going to just go away. We want to have some predictability on this. I'm looking for whether or not we have an infrastructure to continue this. And the third table is saying, you know, all this is nice, but if I don't see any kind of change based on what we're doing, you know, so, you know, this is the way I'm defining whether this is of value to me, how I'm staying with this group. So putting this together, you know, we could see, and we gave this, we went back on a call kind of like this and talked through some of what are we making these assumptions that this is what you want based on what you said. And that's how we've developed this community. Right now, we've created a thing we call learning labs where somebody is always presenting something that's been done. Like Joe Kloss and Colleen Igo did something on a simulation of poverty, like trying to help people understand what it's like to make decisions if you're living in poverty, you know, to sensitize schools and communities. That went over really big. Last month, Joe Barnhart shared how they put a warm line together for around Corona-19 in 10 days, which the women's shelter kind of offered all their infrastructure, all their phone lines to actually do this, how they put it together in 10 days. We had a lot of people interested in that, and Joe's gotten a lot of support. And this month, we're going to have Nicole Wells from Erie County. She's going to talk about how they capitalized on the need for the schools all of a sudden recognized they needed advice on behavioral health, and they built a partnership with the PTAs, and the System of Care Project is coaching all these PTA leaders and doing weekly coaches with them. And so that's something that's going to last well beyond this quarantine, right? So these are the kind of things that we put into these learning labs. We put all the agendas out a week ahead so people can add to it. We're very clear that every time the call is always on the same day, on the same time of the day. So we're trying to meet what they said here in terms of developing this COP. And, you know, things are really coming together. We're trying to act on what they told us. So let me see. What do you think about this? It's a simple tool, but it's one that I think is really quite necessary and quite useful. Boy, and quite useful if we use it in the same way. So, real quick, to what extent can you see yourself using a simple tool like defining our core on the way to finding out what is it that people want from you? What's in their head about what's a value of your community? What do you think? Jamal, you want to put that poll up quick?
And Joanne, do you mean using the tool for defining your core?
Yeah, I mean using the tool or using something like it. That's a takeoff on this idea of like for us it was the idea of using sentence stems and letting people fill that out so that they talk about it and they fill out the sentence stems, and they reveal quite a lot in trying to fill out a sentence stem.
My thought on this was I've been doing focus groups with school districts because there's such a disconnect between leadership and the people on the ground. And so they've been very, very revealing. And so I didn't necessarily do this, but I can easily plug in some of the information that I got from that focus. I kind of did a SWOT but
yeah,
really suggestions. I asked for their suggestions so that may, you know, I can kind of, I can help pull that together in this doc, like kind of using this tool, but it's stuff that I already have. So I'd populate it.
Yeah, and so you could kind of do what we did, put it together and ask people, hey, is this kind of what I thought you said, you know? Is it what you meant? Is it, should I be taking what I'm taking from it, right? Exactly. So everybody said that we got across the board, we got likely. So I'm so glad to see that it was useful. So Jamal, let me see if I can take that screen back. No, it's always going back to it's always going back. I don't know why, Jamal. Okay, so I'm going to move through this, and this is one that that really is a two-part kind of information. I'm going to put together here these infographics and the dialogue guides, and I want you to just kind of hang with me till I kind of share some of this with you, and let's talk then about whether you think it's something you could do. One of the things that it's really important is that the reason that we're using some of these strategies is that when you're in a collaboration and people are at different levels of, they have different information, different levels of information about the topic. They have different levels of influence around that topic. So what we're trying to do here is find some ways that you can find real meaningful activities that many people can participate in, right? So that you're not just creating activities that you've got to have a certain level of information or a certain level of influence to be able to do it. Because in a collaboration, you've got to find a way to have many people be able to play some kind of role. So this is one of the reasons why we created these tools, okay? So, not moving. Let's see. There, nope. It's doing it again, Jamal. There it is. All right, let's see. Nope. All right, so infographics. So one of the things that, building on that Texas work that I showed you, one of the things we did, because we had one full day, we took a look at, you know, after doing the grounding assumption strategy, we had each of the tables take a simple template like this. This is a simple infographic template, as simple as you can get. And we tried to tie together the pieces of the conversation that we were having. So in the first piece, we asked them to put some of the most important data that they thought was conveyed, because before we started, we had a presentation about the Texas data. What was some of the most important data that would cause people to think about the issue that was under consideration? And that top, the template, they had to give it a title and write a compelling statement, simply a compelling statement about coming together around children in Texas. They had to write a simple, compelling statement. So I'll tell you some of the titles that came out of there. They were quite interesting. So the first thing they had to do was pick out some of the data that they thought, and they put it in the needs section. Whoops. The second thing they had to do was to talk about, make it clear in a simple statement, how PBIS and school-wide and children's mental health, community mental health were connected. Simply make that statement that this is to be connected in your own words. Then it leads to the third thing they had to talk about is what's to be gained by that connection. The fourth thing they had to talk about is what's to be lost if you fail to connect, what's to be lost. And the last thing they had to do was a simple statement on what should we start, what should we stop, what do we need to oh, okay, thank you for that. And what do we need, whoops, screwed it up. And what do we need to continue to do, right? So, the challenge here was for them to talk about all the things we had talked about and to come together with something simple and to decide what were the most important things to put on this infographic. Each table came up with their own infographic. We had a lot to choose from. Each table wrote their own compelling statement. Each table gave it a title. The interesting thing I found here was that most of the tables that had a lot of people from the system, either the family system with the federation or the state system with the education system, came up with something that was, you know, highly content-based. And one of the tables came up with something that was entirely different, and they called it "No One Alone in the Lone Star State." And then that's how they framed all of this conversation about that we had to be together to meet the needs that we had after this flood. So we're kind of the same situation after COVID, that we really have to help people understand the amount of trauma that people have expressed and what that means for us. So these are some of the simple ways that we have to do that. Thank you, Ellen. We understand. Great. I'll share the rest of it with you. Okay? Great. So one of the other things that we want to do is that, you know, you can give them the infographic, but helping people know what to do with that infographic is an important piece of this work. So let's take a look at what you think about this infographic. To what extent? Now, if we made it simple enough, do you think that you could use something like co-creation of infographics in your work? Let's see what you think. All right, so people are thinking that it's highly likely that if we could make this simple enough, likely or very likely that they would do this. Excellent. So we're already seeing that people want to take on some of these kinds of activities. Now, Jamal, I know it's going to go. I'm going to hit it. I'm going to go, but see, it goes back to that. So it's just what we're going to have to do till we get through. All right. Now it'll let me do it. Right. So there's two powerful strategies, infographics, and then we put it together with dialogue guides. So here's the dialogue guides. Using the infographic as the source document really helps us because you automatically get greater openness to the stakeholders because they were involved in creating it. So if they created it, they're more likely to want to try to use it in their networks. So that's the strength of trying to put these things together. So in the emails that Jamal sent you, they sent you they sent you an example of an infographic and an example of how we would use infographics in those systems. Both of them are around an initiative we're doing with SAMHSA and the Bainham Foundation, and they're using this as one of their main strategies. But I want to just share with you what's on those. So the infographics, present all the information simply. The dialogue guides helps people to use those infographics. So the idea would be if a family member that maybe doesn't have all the context of all the information there, they could use that infographic if we come up with some questions that they could use to start this conversation. Almost anybody could take that infographic and use it in their networks. And, we can help them build the confidence by giving them a little help on how to facilitate a dialogue. But co-creating the dialogue gives them some of that confidence that they need to actually use this stuff. So in a dialogue guide, we create two kinds of questions. Reaction questions to kind of get out what people feel. And the second part are the reaction questions, things like this. Why is this issue important to you in terms of programs and services, in terms of relationships between two groups, in your experience? And then you ask them a question. What do your colleagues say about? These are the kind of things we put in reaction questions, right? Now, you can help people by giving them this, and you give them the infographic and you give them a set of questions like this. They have a lot more confidence going into a group to hold a discussion about it. Then we ask them to create application questions. And this is about what they're going to do with this information to help them get ideas from the group about what has value. So these are some of the simple application questions. And recall a time when you had this information on the data of what's going to happen after this flood. How might this new knowledge have changed that story? How might a particular stakeholder group be expected to receive this information, kind of pre-thinking that idea? Where will this new information impact practice? How might certain stakeholders be better prepared? These are the kinds of simple starter questions that people can use with an infographic that they've co-created. Almost anybody can have an important role. And then this convener has got to create the sense that we need people to do this. We need people to bring it back to us so that we could have some that we're learning two ways with them. They're taking the information out, they're bringing the information back to us, okay? So here's what we're doing with SAMHSA. SAMHSA invested in 3 expert panel meetings around comprehensive school mental health. And from those 3 meetings, they put together a document called Field Informed Guide to Comprehensive School Mental Health, which has been being widely circulated. But the problem is, how do we know anybody's doing anything with that document? So what we're doing is to invite everybody, and I'm inviting everybody on the phone now, that if you're interested in participating in this, we were starting on this before COVID, but we'll pick it up very shortly. And that is, we're co-creating dialogue guides around some of the things that are in the book. And the first one that we did, and you'll see just exactly what, how it models what we did in Texas. The first one of the first things is this relationship between schools and mental health workers. That school people feel that this practice within schools somehow differs from practice in the community. And in some ways it does, but in some ways it doesn't. So what the first dialogue guide we created would be to help people actually have this conversation about the fact that we don't have the same training traditions and that we're going to run into stuff, right? So that's what this first dialogue guide is about. We put it out as a sample of the kind of things that we intend to do. We invited all the people that were on those expert panels to be on 4 webinars to shape what we were going to do. They're bringing their organizations into the work, and they will be using these dialogue guides in their organization, so that SAMHSA calls it trying to reach the tipping point. Well, you can't reach a tipping point by giving a grant to one group. You got to have multiple groups that take this on as their own work. The same conversation we had as we started today. So this is how we're trying to do it, creating these dialogue guides and having people take it into their own networks. And Shu, if you have families that would like to get into this, I would love to have you get some families into this conversation. We have some people from that Texas Federation that are bringing families, and people from some of the AWARE grants that are bringing families. So please stay in touch with me. I'll make sure you get all the information, okay? But this is one of the things that we've been doing. And then we're activating the network. So you got a sample of this too. And this is the infographic that we created with them that describes how we're going to reach into those networks, so that when they sign on, they know what we're expecting of them. And a good example of this, and Ann, you'll like this, is the PBIS network. They want to be a partner in this. And so the next conference is supposed to be in Minnesota. I don't know what that'll change with COVID, but Rachel, Rachel from the Minnesota, Rachel Freeman said, what if we did this as our state team? What if we did this as a state, and then we became one of the keynotes or one of the big breakout sessions, and we show the other groups how to do this? And what was interesting was when she was saying that, I said to her, that's great, because Mark Sander, who's the mental health in Hennepin County, and Sally Bass, who is was the past president of school psych, are both in Minnesota. You know them, right? And they didn't know them at all. And these are 2 people that were on those expert panels and are also in this work, but are in that team. But because even though we start looking around and we're trying to reach out, we don't really cross each other's networks very well. And so it was great. Rachel saw immediately the potential in doing this. And I'm going to work with her on using Minnesota as a state example. Also going to work with Tina, is doing some of the website stuff for PBIS now. So we're going to try to get this and invite many people in that PBIS network to participate. They don't have to participate in all of it, even if they just want to be on one, that's okay. But the idea of getting people from the networks together on some issue like this. So and you have the full, I could only put what I could get on the screen, but you have I would encourage you to take a look at those pieces. So to what extent do you think, let's think about this, to what extent, and I know that maybe you need some more coaching on this, but if we could give you the coaching to do this, could you see yourself doing co-creation of dialogue guides as a strategy? What do you think? All right, good, okay, so people think they might do it, very good. All right, excellent. So Jamal, across the board so far, even in this group and in the other group, people think that they would do this, but they're probably going to need some help along the line. So we'll see what we can do about putting some more supports in here for people that want to do specific things. Now this last one I want to show you is, Jamal, I know it's gonna, maybe you can move this. So will it move if you move it for me? Because I know I'm gonna go through that other situation if I don't. If you move it, does it do this? That's good. So we're coming into the home stretch now, but this is one that I think, this has got, I say this of so many tools, but this is one that people just get and they like it. And you can use this quite simply, or you can use it on many levels. So this is what it looks like in the book. Okay. So this is when you get your book, this is what it looks like in the book. But what I want to do is to show you, it's not letting me do it, Jamal. There it is. So the idea is that you would take the element, you're asking people to tell a story. And in this case, it would be the story of your work together. So it would be, you're asking them that we're going to capture the story of our work together. What is that story of our work together? And you're going to do it by giving them these Post-it notes that have shapes. And so anything that's a relationship, they write on a heart. Anything that's an activity, they write on a circle, an accomplishment on a star, and then on an arrow, they pointing forward, the driving forces, pointing backward, the restraining forces. And the idea is that you have these Post-it notes on the table, right? And they just start ripping them off, and they're talking individually. You could have the table do it. You could have them do it individually, but they really get into this, right? And then there you have, in this case, if you're doing a big, a story over time, you probably want to do like shelf paper on a wall so it's long and people start putting it up, and you can even divide it into, this year, that year, or this part, this month, that month. And people really get into writing these things down and sticking it up there. You got a lot of activity going in the room. And so they start telling you what's important, and they put up things that you may not have guessed were important to them. But when they can take something as simple as a sticky and write on it and stick it on the wall, they tell you what's important to them. And so I'm going to show you what we did with this is the Pennsylvania Community of Practice on Transition. Now, this is an old one, but we started with them in 2008. And we did this activity. And this is when we were first starting this activity. So they were trying to tell the story of the growth of their community. Now that community is still going today. They have a conference every year at Penn State, probably won't have that this year, but that's called the Community of Practice. It's not called the Transition Conference. It's called the Transition Community of Practice. They're trying to model this idea that if you come there, you can create a role, that you're not just coming as a participant, you're coming as a potential community member, and if you want to, you've got a role. That's what they're trying to model. So this was their story of coming to that idea, right? And so you can see in pre-2008, they had a lot of relationships, but basically they weren't doing anything with those relationships, right? And so as they started to move, you could see how this grew. And then you see somewhere around 2011, things went crazy. All of a sudden it took off. And take a look at what happened by 2013. Now you can imagine the energy in that room with people slapping those things on top of one another, right? I mean, you can imagine everybody wanted to say something that they were excited about, right? So if you don't use this for anything else, what's at the basic level, what does that picture tell you? I mean, if you were a participant in that room, how does that make you feel if you're looking at that? What do you think? Anybody with thoughts on that? If you were a participant in the room and you saw that, what would you think?
It's powerful.
Yeah.
It's easy to get hung up on what you're not doing versus what you are doing.
Absolutely, Ann. And you can, if you're a person in that room, you get the feeling, hey, we're going somewhere. Something's changing here, I mean, a participant that sees that is like, hey, I'm glad I'm a part of something that's going somewhere, right? So this is one of the earliest times we did this. In fact, it actually might be the first time we did it. And you can see how it goes now. Okay, so last year, I did this with a literacy team in Connecticut. And look at how people have evolved in the way that they use this tool, right? You can see all the driving forces at the top, all the restraining forces at the bottom. You see all the activities, you see all the relationships, you see what they think they've accomplished, and you can see how they start to have these things intersect. And I don't know if you can see it, but they even wrote on the chart, like they're connecting ideas and things like that, you know? So in sophistication, it's grown in the way that people are using it. But at its core, people are still excited about slapping those things up there, you know? And then somebody in Ohio said they have to be organized. So then they go up there and they start moving it all around. I mean, it's a different, could I do this with the survey? Absolutely. I could get the same thing with the survey. Could I get this excitement with the survey? Never, right?
Yeah.
So it's a simple tool. And I'm going to show you one more. Here's Texas, right? The same Texas group I've been telling you about. So up to this, this was their regional support networks trying to figure out, they're trying to still communicate this idea that they want to learn with the field. They want to stop this idea of telling everybody what to do. So they're really trying to work on this idea. So look at this. So again, they were pretty organized. So here's what they did. They did 2 of them. Up to this point, what did they think they were doing? And then after they did that, they talked about it. Then they did another one. Moving forward, where do we see our potential, right? So they did it slightly differently. They did the same things, but they instead of just doing one as sort of a retrospective, they did the retrospective and then they did a prospective and thinking about what it would do, and they used the same tool to do it, right? So I was trying to think, how do you do this online? And again, I went to Padlet, and Padlet has this. It just looks like a cork board. And when you click on it, you just get a little Post-it, a little colored Post-it. You put it up there and you stick it under one of these columns. And so you can really do the same kind of thing if you had to do it online. I'm still looking for one where you can do shapes and make it a little bit more fun. But in terms of the interaction, I think you get the same thing. Now, Kate, we're doing this tomorrow with, you want to tell them what we're doing tomorrow quick?
Yeah, so tomorrow, OSEP is putting on a webinar for teachers and parents on how to best support students with disabilities during all of this online learning. And so we have a, is it called, what is the group called? Joanne, the
professional development program. So this is all the grants that OSEP funds, professional development grants, the training grants.
The professional development program, some of the members who are students and faculty members at various universities, they're going to participate in sort of like a dialogue on this, like by posting their responses to questions, kind of like a discussion board post based on the webinar that OSEP is putting on.
Yeah,
pretty cool.
And so the idea here is that, you know, we're trying to get faculty to see the Department of Ed is creating all kinds of materials that you could be embedding in your courses, and most of you don't know about them and you don't use them. So we got some faculty to be these designated responders and listen to that webinar and start saying, this is, of course, the one I did for Texas, but tomorrow they're going to answer questions like, can I see me embedding these into my course? You know, do I think that my students in my courses would have immediate usability of tools like this? Get them to think about putting some of these tools in their courses. At the same time, tell them what you're doing with the student teachers, Kate.
So I just reached out to my, I'm a supervisor for student teachers here at UW-Madison. And so I reached out to my student teaching network and asked if anyone would be interested in joining, because I think it would be really helpful to get their perspectives too on like what resources they feel like as beginning teachers, and like this is their sort of first go around at teaching has been online learning. So they're going to get a chance to respond to some similar questions that we're asking the faculty to respond to. Student teachers are going to get a chance to respond as well.
Great.
Yeah. So I heard that OSEP has 6,000 people registered for this webinar.
Wow.
So we picked out a group of, of targeted faculty, and Kate reached out to the Student Teacher Network. And then these are all resources for families, right? And what we were trying to get the faculty members to do is pay attention to, there's a lot of stuff produced for families that you should be putting in your courses, because teachers have to reach families, you know, they're not reaching. Of course you have to learn the theory, but it's not the theory that's going to help them reach the families. These immediate resources should be in your courses. So we're trying to get the faculty to understand that. And so what I did was I reached out to one of the family members that is really big in transition, that's done a lot in transition. And she's been really trying to get them to think about family as faculty, right? Family as real faculty in courses, you know, as co-teaching a course, with, especially when they're talking about families as co-teachers. So I had those two families and their two youth. They're going to respond. I think they're going to go on the student teacher Padlet, Kate. So I sent them both. I told them they could go on whichever one they thought fit. But we're trying to get more people into this kind of conversation and then do something with the grants based on this. And it's based on this idea, same idea as these little stickies, only we're trying to do it online. So the idea here is that from all these stickies that you saw on the screen, then you start to, you know, besides the energizing activity, you really start to learn what has value to your partners, what's the big ideas that people that you didn't even know cared about something are slapping that up there, and what are the stories that should be captured, and we call them value stories. How do these value stories, you know, lead you to understand what's of value to these people? What did they think coming in, and what changed their ideas about you and your collaboration? Sometimes it's really simple things. So I wanted to share with you, I guess we want to do one other thing. So real quick, and the thing I want to share with you is you used to be able to buy all those shapes pretty easily on Post-its, but you can't anymore. They have them grouped in all kinds of crazy ways. I have to buy a pineapple to get a heart, you know? So I just had them made. And if you want them, I will give them. I'll send them to you. You just have to let Jamal know you want them and how many. And if you'll use them in a meeting, I'll send you all these. Okay, they're in pack. These are in packs of 25. I think the next pack I'm going to get done in packs of 10. Packs of 25. The people can use them at the table, and they can take the rest for their own use. So these are all in packs of 25, and I'll send them to you if you want them. But, oh shoot, thank you. I'm glad you'll do this. I'd love to see families do something like this. Yeah. So tell me, how likely would you be to do this? If you had these either online or you had the stickies, would you be likely to do it? Across the board, people are likely to do this. That's great. Very likely to do it. Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm glad you like these ideas. It's always important to me to try to test whether, I mean, I think they make sense. I don't know if anybody else thinks they make sense unless I test them like this with you. So Jamal, I know, oh, there you are. You did it without having to go back to the other one. Thank you. So your books are coming in the mail, and a couple things I want to show you before we leave. So your books are coming in the mail, and in the back of here's your book, and in the back of your book, there's a little folder like this, and in that folder is something that looks like a credit card, but it isn't a credit card. It's a USB, okay? And if you can see that, the USB comes right out of the credit card, and you'll never mistake what it is because it looks just like a reading by convening book. And this little piece just sticks up, and everything is on there. The whole book, all the tools, everything you need, everything is fillable. You can put it up on the screen at a meeting. You don't need internet. You can fill it out, and you can save it. You can use it again for another format. So in the back of your book is your USB. And then I wanted you to take a look that, you know, I've only was able to show you some of the tools. There's some in there that I really think you're going to want to take a look at. One of them is What's in It for Me, and it's a tool that helps you identify the self-interest of your partners. Why in their own self-interest would they be there? Another one is Building Engagement, and this has a whole lot of ideas in it. This idea of getting these designated responders, that's in there. That's something we did in the partnership. Everybody's got 1 million webinars coming on their screen, right? think about a collaboration where how simple is this? You get a webinar that comes across your screen. You ask so many people in your network to listen to that webinar and then get together and tell you what is the most important thing out of that webinar that your people need to know, or let those people be on a call and say, here's what was important about the webinar. The idea of us always being the ones that are on these webinars, instead of us inviting the people that we're supposed to be reaching to be on those webinars, and then tell us or tell other people what's important about that webinar, is a strategy that's in there. I just ask you to rethink, how you can do a simple thing like a webinar comes across your screen. How can you make that an engaging activity, right? The last two are really about the relationship. The first one basically says, it takes a statement from an organizational theorist, and he says, enter every relationship as if you're already partners. So what does that as if means to you? What does it mean to enter as if you're already a partner? So that's a good conversation to have with people. The last one is a branding tool from business. We adapted it, and it basically asks you, how do you want to be seen, and how do you think people are seeing you? and the difference, right? So these are some of the things that I would hope that you take a look at in addition to the things that I shared with you. And I'll be sure to get these out to Jamal. Just tell him you want them, and I'll make sure you get the stickies to go along with this tool. So I want to thank all of you today. I thought for sure we'd go through this in no time, since there was only a few of us, and we spent the whole 2 hours anyway.
So, Joanne, I have a quick question for you. So
Yeah.
would you use the chronology instead of the survey? Like doing doing the survey, because you guys had it on Survey Monkey and doing
I do.
Okay.
I think the chronology is more of a every once in a while you do the survey, but every once in a while you do this leading by convening thing. I'm used to do it people once a year, right? But the other one you actually want more often. So we designed that one to be done 3 times a year. And we started working on a site with FrameWeld, so that you could personalize it. You could change what was in the things. You could set it for automatically, that it would remind you that every 3 months you should send it out. Mm-hmm. You could actually, and we had a thing where you couldn't change what was in there unless you did it the same way we developed it, so that you had to have a cross-stakeholder group to change anything on that survey. But the survey is more regular. This is more of a celebration kind of thing. Got it. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good question, though. I think that's a good clarification for me for the future. Okay, you guys, this was wonderful. I really enjoyed it today. Thank you so much for your participation. It was great. And Shu, I'll make sure you get these, okay?
And me too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Sure. And Shu, if you need it for a particular, well, actually, if anybody needs it for a particular date, because after I promised these, I realized, oh my gosh, I'm in Pennsylvania and they're in Virginia. So I'm going to have to go get them. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.